Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Media Foundation, I welcome you to the presentation of the Chameli Devi Jain Award 2024 for Outstanding Woman Media Person of the Year, and also the B.G. Verghese Memorial Lecture, which will be delivered by editor and author Mr. T.N. Ninan on work and wages, old challenges in the age of automation and AI. May I now just request everybody to please keep their phones either switched off or in the silent mode. So the Media Foundation was instituted in 1979 with the aim of upholding freedom of speech, expression, and information, and to enhance the quality of life through media and communication. Its founding members were such media stalwarts as B.G. Verghese, Prabhash Joshi, N.S. Jagannathan, Ajit Bhattacharjee, noted public intellectual L.C. Jain, among others. Apart from giving the Chameli Devi Jain Award, the Foundation also holds the quarterly Media Dialogues, which debate and analyze important issues related to the media in the country. In 2001, the Foundation launched thehoot.org, and for the next 17 years, until it ceased operation, it was the most respected Media Watch website in the country. The Chameli Devi Jain Award, which will be presented today, was set up by the Media Foundation in 1980. The award is named after Chameli Devi Jain, a freedom fighter and community reformer who was imprisoned during India's independence movement. The first award was given in 1982, and since then it has been presented every year to women journalists practicing impactful journalism in fields such as social development, politics, gender justice, human rights, health, conflict, and consumer rights. Past winners of this prestigious award, which is endowed by the Jain family, include some of the finest journalists of India. The Chameli Devi Jain Award has also recognized women journalists from rural areas whose stellar work often goes unnoticed. This evening's program is, of course, a double bill of events. First, we will have the presentation of the Chameli Devi Jain Award. This will be followed by the B.G. Verghese Memorial Lecture, which was instituted in 2015 in memory of legendary editor and free speech defender B.G. Verghese. In the past, the memorial lecture has been delivered by such distinguished persons as former Governor Gopal Gandhi, Justice A.P. Shah, Justice Madan Lokur, academic and political theorist Pratap Bhanu Mehta, and so on. May I now call upon the chairperson of the Media Foundation, editor and columnist Mr. Bharat Bhushan, to please come on stage. I would also like to welcome on stage Mr. T.N. Ninan, who will deliver the B.G. Verghese Memorial Lecture later this evening. Mr. Ninan was the editor and publisher and later chairman of Business Standard. An award-winning journalist, he has also edited the Economic Times and Business World and was the executive editor of India Today in the 1980s. He is the author of The Turn of the Tortoise, published in 2015, and until recently wrote a closely followed weekly column called Weekend Ruminations for Business Standard. He has in the past been a commentator on news television. Mr. Ninan serves as chairman of the board of trustees of the Independent and Public-Spirited Media Foundation, India's largest charitable funder of the digital media. He has in the past also served on several other non-profit boards and taken part in international Track 2 dialogues. Ladies and gentlemen, a very big hand for Mr. Ninan, please.
Thank you.
We move to the award ceremony now. This year, the Chameli Devi Jain Award received nearly 70 entries, many of which were truly outstanding. They were a testament to the path-breaking work that many women journalists are doing across the country, not merely in the mainstream media, but also in smaller regional language publications and platforms. Indeed, it was a tough task for the jury to sift through the many deserving candidates and come up with the best. And let me now introduce you to our esteemed jury members. Maria Malavi is an award-winning journalist and author who has reported extensively on minority rights, hate crimes, politics, the economy, and the pandemic. The investigative report by her and journalist Srinivasan Jain exposing the right-wing bogey of love jihad earned them the Excellence in Journalism Award by the International Press Institute, India, in 2020. She recently co-authored the book Love Jihad and Other Fictions, Simple Facts to Counter Viral Falsehoods, which debunks prominent right-wing conspiracy theories. Richard Mahapatra, our other jury member, is managing editor of Down to Earth magazine. He co-edits the annual State of India's Environment Report and has been writing on the linkages between environment and poverty. His reporting analyzes the developments at the village level in the wider context of national and global changes. He also writes on climate change and human migration. A recipient of the Prem Bhatia Fellowship to study the environmental impact of conflicts in India, he has also won the award for Best Rural Reporter from UNICEF and Press Institute of India. Radhika Ramaseshan, who chaired the jury panel, is contributing editor at Business Standard and a columnist in newspapers and digital sites. She writes on hardcore politics, her focus being the Sangh Parivar and the BJP and the Modi government. In the nearly 40 years she has spent in journalism, she has worked with the Sunday Observer, Sunday Magazine from the ABP stable, the Pioneer, Independent, and the Telegraph, where she was political editor until 2016. Her other areas of journalistic interest are heartland politics, communal and ethnic conflicts, and the socio-political dynamics resulting from the intersection of religion, caste, and politics. May I now request Radhika Ramaseshan, the jury chair, to please come on stage and announce the winner of the Chameli Devi Jain Award 2024 for Outstanding Women Media Person of the Year, and also share with us the reasons for the way the jury voted as they did.
Mr. Bharat Bhushan, Chairperson of the Media Foundation, Mr. T.N. Ninan, Editor and Author, who will shortly deliver the B.G. Verghese Memorial Lecture, and friends. It is indeed a privilege and an honor for us, the jury, to select the winner of the Chameli Devi Jain Award for Outstanding Media Person of the Year 2023. As the chairperson, I thank my fellow jurors, Richard Mahapatra and Mariam Alvi, for putting our heads together for a detailed discussion on the 12 entries that were shortlisted for our consideration and selection among the 69 entries we have had this year. These include works in Hindi, Gujarati, Odia, Malayalam, and Bangla. The geographical and linguistic span reflects the fact that some of the best and most grounded journalism has to be searched out for outside the metros and in languages other than English. Our shortlist had works from print, digital, and visual media in English and Hindi. As a journalist who worked for long years outside Mumbai and Delhi, considered traditional journalistic hubs, I am proud to say that the shortlisted samples included standout pieces from rural Maharashtra, Rajasthan, Karnataka, and Chhattisgarh. Among the contributions worthy of note are a detailed report on the intricacies and procedures involved in getting organs for transplant, for long described as a trade because commerce overwhelms the humanitarian aspect. A report on the trade-offs entailed by the bride market in rural Rajasthan, and unfortunately that's the only phrase I could think of to describe the practice, merits mention, as also the condition of gig workers in Hyderabad, which is significant because Uber and Swiggy increasingly impinge on our lives. Hate crimes against Muslims, rarely if ever covered by mainstream media, whether sparked off by an ex-post or a speech by Hindu fundamentalists, were detailed in some reports, filling a much-needed vacuum. However, at the end of the day, there can be only one winner. This year, of course, we unanimously made an exception and selected two joint winners because the exceptionally high quality of the shortlisted works made the jury's job challenging. I believe that joint winners were declared occasionally in the past, so the choice is not unprecedented. I am pleased to announce that the winners for 2023 are Grishma Kutar and Ritika Chopra. Grishma was chosen for her outstanding work on the ethnic violence in Manipur, which began in May 2023 and continues even today under the patronage of the state government and an indifferent center. Grishma's writings and videos were an important window to see what happened on ground zero for those who couldn't travel to Manipur. I must emphasize that it isn't just the quality of her work which recommended her for the award, but the circumstances under which Grishma functioned. She is Chennai-based, but was clearly not yoked by what's termed very fashionably as a tyranny of geography. Ironically, geographical constraints seem to matter with mainstream media when a dilemma arises over covering developments in the Kashmir Valley or the Northeast. Grishma is an independent journalist. With zero institutional backing, she traveled to Manipur and camped there from May until end 2023, and I'm told that even now she visits the state from Chennai. Grishma did not confine herself to Imphal. She realized that the conflict was far more complex than what was purveyed in the government handouts published in the media. She traveled to the hinterland in arduous conditions because taxis were rarely available in view of the volatile situation, and stayed in villages because every place was not fortunate enough to have a hotel or a lodge. Her dedication is the more remarkable because she wasn't even certain about who would carry her outfit. Fortunately, she found forums like Caravan, Al Jazeera Online, and the India Forum, which carried her writings, and Suno India, her videos, among other places. The important aspect is that her work was posted on X and Facebook for greater access at a time when mainstream media was parsimonious with its Manipur reportage. I want to stress that. Grishma's people-centered stories from the perspective of the oppressor and the victim detailed the complete breakdown of law and order and the ethnic polarization, which impacted not just civil society, but administration and policing, caused by a stark division between the state police, which sided with a certain community regarded as a dominant community in Manipur, and the army and central forces who were trusted by the victims, obviously much more than the state police, which had acquired a reputation for being totally partisan. Ritika Chopra exemplifies the fact that exclusive news breaks on the policies and moves of a government can be coaxed in the most hostile conditions, such as we are up against presently. The hallmark of the ruling regime is opaqueness. Its instinct is to block access to the media wherever it can. And this includes most government offices. I mean, journalists can no longer enter with a PIB card or whatever, you know. Ritika has filled a much required gap with a formidable body of work on the Election Commission, the so-called Institutes of Higher Learning and Excellence, directly patronized by the center, and the NCERET's persistent endeavor to write history texts for school students with a specific agenda of obliterating and not just minimizing the contributions made by Islamic rulers. Ritika's reports on the center's moves to do away with the independence of statutory bodies like the Election Commission became the gold standard of government reportage. That she broke through the impregnable walls of government offices is a remarkable achievement for a journalist who fortunately still has institutional backing from her employer, Indian Express in this case. We, the jury, congratulate Grishma and Ritika for their work, and we hope their contributions continue making news in every sense in the years to come. Thank you.
I would now like to welcome on stage Grishma Kutar and Ritika Chopra, the joint winners of the Chameli Devi Jain Award 2024. Ladies and gentlemen, a very big hand for the two winners. May I request TMF Chair Mr. Bharat Bhushan to read the citations and Mr. Ninan to present the awards to the winners. It's a trophy and a token cash award of rupees 25,000 and a citation, of course.
So I'll read out Grishma's citation first. The Media Foundation is very pleased to present the Chameli Devi Jain Award 2024 for Outstanding Woman Media Person of the Year to Grishma Kutar, an independent multimedia journalist who has been reporting and analyzing conflict situations and the political undercurrents and complexities which influence administration in these areas. Ms. Kutar is recognized because of her corpus of work, uncovers the injustices inflicted by the rich and the powerful, some of which may be state patronized, on the marginalized, oppressed, and the underempowered. The standout pieces of a formidable body of work in the year gone by come from Manipur, where an ongoing ethnic conflict reached a flashpoint in May 2023. Though Ms. Kutar is Chennai-based, she lived in Manipur almost from the inception of the conflict till the end of 2023, traveling to the hinterland and the trouble spots where few journalists ventured. She asked questions of the police and the state administration, both of which have got away scot-free for their sins of omission and commission. Ms. Kutar is commended too for articulating and reflecting every point of view in the troubled state. Apart from the two warring ethnic communities, the Kukis and the Meiteis, there are other groups that make up Manipur's complex social mosaic. She sought out people from each group, including the victims, and this has given her work a holistic perspective that is unusual in conflict reporting. We will also make special mention of an 18-part series she investigated and reported on the saffronization of coastal Karnataka, which was accomplished by a powerful ruling party official whom the mainstream media never questions. Grishma Kutar's courageous, incisive, and in-depth journalism makes her a role model for all media persons in these cynical and conformist times. Congratulations, Grishma. And now the citation for Ritika Chopra. The Media Foundation is once again very pleased to present the Chameli Devi Jain Award 2024 for Outstanding Woman Media Person of the Year to Ritika Chopra, currently employed by the Indian Express as Chief of its National Bureau, Government, and its National Education Editor. Her deeply and meticulously reported investigative stories have exposed not only the lapses in the government's policy making, but also the way the state has tried to weaken independent institutions and rewrite history. Despite a great deal of opacity on part of the government, Ms. Chopra managed to uncover the manifold ways in which school textbooks are being modified so as to delete large chunks of the country's political and social history. Her granular reporting in the series of stories on the NCERT's campaign to rewrite textbooks put the spotlight on the larger ideological design at play to influence the minds of Indian children so that they grow up learning and believing only a certain version of events. Ms. Chopra is commended for her deep dive journalism and the enormous social and political relevance of her work. Her newsbreak stories on the Election Commission of India, for instance, revealed the government's attempts to downgrade the office of the Chief Election Commissioner, which would automatically have diluted the power and independence of this key institution of India's democracy. Her reports in this regard evoked a strong reaction and eventually saw the government backtracking and restoring the status of the Chief Election Commissioner. Ritika Chopra's rigorous, impactful, and exhaustive reporting on issues of national importance is a lesson in journalism as it should be practiced and stands out as an example of objectivity and professionalism at a time when much of Indian media have relinquished both qualities. Congratulations, Ritika.
Mr. Ninan, may I now request you to present the awards to the winners? Would Mariam Alavi and Richard Mahapatra, the other members of the jury panel, please come on stage? We can have some more pictures. Please don't leave the stage, jury members. May I request TMF Treasurer Nupur Basu to please give our jury members a token of our appreciation.
Richard. Okay, thank you.
I would now like to request our outstanding women journalists to share their thoughts on winning this award, tell us a little bit about their journeys, journalistic journeys. We'll go alphabetically as usual. Grishma Kutar, would you please share your thoughts with us?
First off, thank you to everybody who thought I'm worthy of this award. I mean, Bharat Bhushan sir, I happened to have seen him and met him for the first time while I was in Manipur when the Editors Guild team had visited Manipur. That was when I had interacted with him. And after that, pretty much, you know, I have been like completely off the radar in the sense that Manipur is completely cut off. Internet came back around September-ish, but it's like in patches, the network is pretty bad. But I've just been off. But at this point, now that, you know, there is an opportunity for me to look back on my work, not just in the context of Manipur, but in the context of journalism itself that, you know, I have tried to like practice. I've tried to understand where is it that I see myself or where is it that I understand my work is at the moment, you know, as a journalist. I don't know if a lot of people know, but I'm actually a lawyer. I was very keen to be, you know, a good trial lawyer. I wanted to practice only criminal law at one point, and I was very, very actively working towards becoming a good trial lawyer in Bangalore when a friend of mine who runs this YouTube channel called Dalit Camera said there is this thing happening in Una. Since you're the only one who knows Hindi, which I didn't know so much, why don't you go and cover what's happening in Una? I mean, y'all are aware of what happened in Una in 2016. And that's actually like inaccurate because not everybody in Gujarat speaks Hindi. Hardly people in Gujarat speak Hindi. So I went to Gujarat to cover the assertion, whatever followed the violence that the family in Mota Samadiyala faced. There was a lot of assertion, a lot of organizing around, you know, what had happened there. And this was a very small community. It was only 5 to 6% of Gujarat, the Dalit community of Gujarat. And there was a lot of mobilizing that they did, which of course wasn't coming out, which wasn't being shared actively. So I was told to go and cover it, you know, for a YouTube platform, and we had social media pages as well. So that's where my journey started. And when it started, one incident that I starkly remember is when there was this 10-day rally that was planned from Ahmedabad to Una. And just the day before it was supposed to end, there was this crazy mobilization of Gaurakshaks, right? Because this whole thing was around this carcass, this cow carcass, which these people were skinning. And about the whole allegation was that they had killed that cow. And on the 10 days, there was this yatra which was taken out for 10 days saying that we will no longer do caste occupations. And just one day before this yatra was to conclude, there was this mobilization of Gaurakshaks right before Una. And the entire group that was going towards Una took a different route. All these cars of NDTV and Times Now and all of them are parked right at the brink of the place where, you know, all these Gaurakshaks had mobilized. They had mobilized in thousands. And me and a colleague, a friend of mine, Amit, another journalist, we were like, let's just go ask them what is it that they're up to. So we went right into the crowd of Gaurakshaks, like women and men and all of them. And we were like, what do you want? Like, what's your deal? I mean, they're doing a yatra. What is it? I mean, you're at fault, right? What is your problem? And we are just like journalists. We are just kids. We just want to understand what your deal is. And then they go into this whole tirade about, you know, Gai Meri Maa hai, and Dalit Muslim bye-bye, to Savarnon ka kya hoga? Savarnon ko peace diya hai Rajkiyon ne. Something and all. There's a huge thing, but we got all of that on camera and we were like, wow. We got something. We thought we got a video where, you know, there is one side that isn't speaking, where they're openly saying that we will beat these people up. We picked up that video just as we finished that interview, which spanned around 15 minutes. A stampede broke out. We had to run. And I just thought, you know, both of us, me and Amit, thought that we had this very nice video that we can send to our editors. And in 10 minutes, we were followed and our bike was hit and we flew, and it was pretty dramatic in the sense that I was badly hurt. And yet we continued to complete the yatra. We finished shooting the yatra. And then a friend of mine, another journalist, Sudipto, said, dude, don't do, you know, be a little less dramatic. Don't do your heroics when you're dealing with such crowds, because it's not going to help you move forward in journalism. But I think back from then till now, somehow feels like everything is dramatic about doing any kind of journalism in this country. And it's really bad. The state of affairs is so bad that basic stuff that we are doing is being called dramatics, you know, it's being called like stuff that I can't honestly imagine, in the sense that, I mean, more journalists should have been in Manipur, right? It shouldn't have been just a few of us, because what is happening in Manipur, what happened and what is happening in Manipur is, it's an experiment that is taking a new color every day, and the manner in which it's turning out every other day is, it's not scary. It's that an entire population of people, doesn't have to be Kuki, Meitei, Naga, what, they're all inconsequential to a lot of people, including the government and journalists and mainstream society, whatever it is that you want to call it. So more people had to be interested in this, and that was something, because I prefer reporting about the South. I want to only report about the South. Most of my writing before Manipur was about, in fact, the 18-part series that Sir mentioned, it was about my region of Tulu Nadu, right? It was about what is it that's going wrong in that region that I really was interested in, because my family was involved, people close to are involved, and you ask difficult questions in those spaces. And that's when you come to a conclusion, and that's the space that I wanted to work in. But what was happening in Manipur was crazy in May, you know, and we weren't getting information. And when we started receiving more and more inputs about sexual violence, then some of us thought we have to step in. That's how it started with Manipur. But, you know, kind of coming out of that, I just want to like take a detour and speak a little bit about why is it that I thought it was important for me to go to Manipur. So, you know, like I am a 90s kid, and there's a lot of talk about what being a 90s kid means. Like, you know, people are like, 90s kids don't get married, 90s kids aren't responsible, 90s kids, you know, don't care so much. All of these things are, there's a lot of generalization of what being a 90s kid is. But I feel like the most important aspect of being a 90s kid is that in 92, you know, like a year and a half after I was born, Babri Masjid happened. And while I was in school, none of us knew what Babri Masjid is. It wasn't discussed so much. The year that I was born is where protests around Mandal happened, you know, the implementation of Mandal reforms. The thing is that was discussed a lot as I was growing up. I remember the anti-reservation sentiment that was there in our country, it kind of grew with my generation, where people thought it was cool to talk about, you know, what reservation meant or what it didn't mean. And the protests against Mandal happened in 1990. By the time I was, you know, a lawyer, and, you know, I was also actively writing, which is 2016, is when Rohit Vemula left us. So from 90, where people started speaking about reservation in a certain way, to 2016, why had nothing changed to kind of affirm to this country that caste is one of the biggest things that needs to be reported on, grounded. We need to be grounded in the fact that we are deeply casteist in every way possible. Instead, what was happening? Instead, while I graduated from law school, I did my law in Mangalore. And in Mangalore, things had changed drastically since my parents had been children. And since, when I graduated in 2013, I was told that my people don't have so much to do with Hinduism. But I was told that I am Hindu and another ethnic community, similar to Tuluas or Bari, are Muslim. And the main thing that we have to do is go against each other. This is how it had, turned out into the society that I come from. This is what they were talking about. They were talking about love jihad in a region where we have an indigenous deity whose father is Bari and mother is a Tulu woman. We come from a region like that, and that region, you're talking about love jihad, you're talking about Muslims being outsiders, where Muslims speak a language called Bari, which is a Dravidian language. So it had come to the state where this is the language that you're talking about, when it comes to Hindu and Muslim, but there's no talk about caste. This is the situation in which I enter journalism. I start doing journalism, and I realized that if I'm in mainstream spaces, I can speak about communalism in the context of Hindu-Muslim, but I can't speak about cultural nationalism that the RSS does. And who does that cultural nationalism, I can't speak about. If I'm speaking about caste, I'll have to speak about it only about atrocities. I can't speak about assertion, because while I was in Gujarat, I saw people flinging carcasses of dead cows into government offices as a response to Una. That is something that I saw with my eyes. And it didn't come in mainstream channels. It didn't come in mainstream news. It wasn't reported. Some regional channels picked it up, but that kind of assertion wasn't. And this was happening in Gujarat. And I'm from the south. I was brought up in Tamil Nadu, and I hadn't seen something like that. So I understood that for me to do the journalism that I think is the most important journalism, I have to be an outlier. I can't do, whatever I do will not be considered as mainstream by mainstream journalists or mainstream journalism spaces. I'll have to continue to be an outlier where, I decide that this is what I'll talk about, so I'll have to speak in these spaces. Those spaces will also be speaking about the most important issues. I write for the Caravan. Caravan speaks about and lets me do investigative pieces about issues that other outlets will never let me speak about, and yet they're considered as, what the treatment with Caravan is right now. So to do the journalism that is the most important at this moment, you have to be an outlier. Because there has been a certain trend that journalism has had in this country where the most important issues have been considered as issues which are issues of the marginalized, which are issues of, alternate whatever media, alternate issues, whatever you want to call it. That is how it has been. Because from 1990, where Mandal happened, to 2016, if it wasn't driven in our head, it wasn't driven in our psyche that caste, I'm speaking in my lifetime, right? It wasn't driven in our psyche that caste is what is the most important issue right now, be it in institutions, be it in any space, be it even in the media, then what are we even talking about, right? So right now, from 2016 to now, I've realized that things are pretty much the same. Journalism is bad, it's the same. We are still struggling to talk about what's most important, and that's where we come to Manipur. It's only because I am an outlier that I decided, or I had to go to Manipur, right? Because if mainstream journalists had decided, if mainstream spaces had decided that this is an important issue, they would have been in Manipur in the first week of May. Everything that happened after that wouldn't have happened, maybe, I don't know. Because so much happened after May. Even now there's so much happening in Manipur, and yet, how are we talking about Manipur? The fact that this country doesn't think that two women experiencing what they did, which we all saw visually, which the world saw, wasn't important enough to stop a war, wasn't important enough to dethrone, or whatever you want to call it, the CM, whoever it is in the state administration, it wasn't important enough, shows where we think about not only tribal women, but also women in this country. That's one thing. Second thing, that is how important Manipur is. Manipur is like a permanent buffer zone right now. It's become a buffer zone in the sense that we can talk about it, we can discuss that, these tribes are doing this and that. Are these people tribals? Are these people not tribals? In the context of the Meiteis, we can talk about neutral journalism, whatever it is that we want to talk about. But at the end of the day, the fact that everybody is suffering the consequences of journalism that isn't, that isn't for the people, that isn't about truth telling, is the truth. And I would like to end with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Grishma. That was a very, very passionate speech. I'd now like to invite our other awardee, Ritika Chopra, to please share her thoughts with us.
Thank you, members of the jury, the Media Foundation, distinguished guests. I am deeply honored to receive the Chameli Devi Jain Award and share it with Grishma. I am humbled for being chosen to join the illustrious ranks of those who won the award since 1982. I'm privileged to have some of them as my colleagues. Their groundbreaking work paved the way for voices to be heard and stories to be told. We stand in their shadow. This award is also an endorsement and an encouragement of the work we do and the work we need to keep doing, especially when the overwhelming refrain in our profession today is how difficult it has become to practice it. The challenges are many, from increasing opacity in governance, to threats and trolls, to what the future holds in our rapidly losing battle to remain more original than ChatGPT. And yet we persist, and we have to. We keep doggedly chasing sources, going through reams of data and reports, checking and cross-checking facts, waiting for a source to call back, and finally putting out the story. We do this because, first of all, we love it, but also because for all the talk of the challenges we face, there is no other way to stand up other than to sit down and do the hard work. In this, I'm lucky to have the newsroom of the Indian Express, where there is no dearth of editors, as exacting as generous. None of this would have been possible without their unwavering support and encouragement. Rajkamal Jha, Uni Shankar, P. Vaidyanathan Iyer, who have stood by me through late night calls and demanding deadlines. 8 years on, the Express newsroom continues to push me past my limits and discover my potential each day. I am deeply grateful for the faith and the tough love that's fueled my growth here. In the end, let me wear my editor's hat for a moment and speak to the young reporters in the room. This award is a recognition for some of the work I have done as a reporter covering education. Education is viewed as a less glamorous beat, a junior beat, but as our work at the Indian Express has shown over the years, such as the series on the changes affected in the NCERT textbooks, the changing character of our campuses, it is a critical area that needs our attention more than ever. And given how many young people we have, covering education, I have found, is also covering an entire generation's aspiration, hope, and despair. I began this speech by talking about how challenging it is to be a journalist today. I will end it by underlining that persistence, the unglamorous, dogged determination to search for the truth with fairness and accuracy. In other words, good journalism is the only way that will help us rise to meet those very challenges. Thank you, Media Foundation, for keeping the faith. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
So thank you, Grishma and Ritika, for your wonderful acceptance speeches. My faith in Indian journalism is renewed after listening to Grishma and Ritika. Most of us at my age say, oh, journalism used to be great and look what it's become now. But when I listen to them, I realize that best of Indian journalism is yet to come, and will come through people like Grishma and Ritika. So thank you very much indeed. Now may I invite my favorite editor, one of the last great editors, if I might say so, in case I offend some editors here, one of the last great editors, T.N. Ninan, who's changed the way of thinking of a whole generation of journalists, nurtured them, mentored them, and made them better journalists. But T.N. Ninan is not only an editor, he is also an economic thinker, an analyst, and a brilliant columnist. So now may I invite Mr. Ninan to please give the B.G. Verghese Memorial Lecture.
Thank you, Bharat, and good evening, friends, jury members, award winners, a lot of friendly faces in the room, and thank you to the Media Foundation for inviting me to give this lecture. At the outset, I'd like to congratulate Ritika and Grishma, our two award winners. You've come through a rigorous screening process, and the recognition given to you this evening is a tribute to the quality of your work. And since you are women, I should mention what B.G. Verghese said in his memoirs about his stint as editor of the Hindustan Times. He wrote, quote, "I found the women distinctly superior," and this is his colleagues in the paper, and had, you have to listen to the rest of it, and had no hesitation in taking them on despite murmurs about their not being put on late shifts, the likelihood of their getting married and going away, or seeking maternity leave, the need to allot them separate toilets, and so on. We were pioneers in the feminization of our workforce. I think I'd be right in saying that there is almost no resistance today to hiring women as journalists. They are in abundance in most of our newsrooms, though there are still quite few at the top as editors. Other than the Hindustan Times, which Verghese edited for about 7 years, he also served as the editor of the Indian Express for 4 years. He came to HT from being a member of Indira Gandhi's staff as information advisor. Verghese was a man with many opinions, and some would say many hobby horses. So he had taken to sending Mrs. Gandhi long policy memos on subjects that had little to do with the media. She wasn't interested, so he left for the Hindustan Times. There he became steadily more disenchanted with her politics, and it showed in the paper's coverage. Political pressure built up on the paper's proprietor to change the editor, and what followed was something extraordinary. When colleagues in the paper realized that their editor was about to be changed under political pressure, they set up an impromptu committee, collected money, and took the case to the Press Council. There they argued that press freedom meant the freedom of the editor, not the proprietor. The paper went to the Delhi High Court, saying that these journalists had no case. It lost in the High Court, but went in appeal. Eventually, the court said the proprietor could determine policy, but everything else lay with the editor. But a day later, Verghese was sacked on the office staircase as he was about to leave home at 9 o'clock. To tell you where she stood, Mrs. Gandhi then abolished the Press Council. The whole episode speaks of a more innocent time when journalists believed that editorial freedom should and could be protected even if, or especially if, the proprietor was making political compromises. It was also a time when public institutions held true to their mission. But there was a lesson in the fact that eventually the proprietor had his way. On a personal note, I got my first journalistic job at the Hindustan Times when Verghese was its editor. So did my wife, Shevanti. It is therefore a personal honor for me to deliver a lecture named for an accomplished editor whose range of interests went well beyond the newspapers he edited. One of the things about Verghese was that he didn't believe in just cursing the darkness. He also wanted to shed light on solutions. In a journalistic world full of weary cynics, Verghese believed that things could be improved. So today, I would like to take a leaf out of the Verghese book and go beyond describing our many failures on the jobs front. I also want to point to some silver linings and to look for possible solutions. And so to the subject before us, jobs and wages and old and new challenges. Sometimes I think that our national sport is not cricket, but playing with numbers, statistics. We play with GDP numbers, poverty numbers, employment numbers, consumption numbers, and you'll ask, how is the game played? That's simple. By using the same numbers to arrive at completely opposite conclusions. There's only one thing that you can safely say. If an economist uses macro statistics to assert that the economy is doing well, he is, of course, pro-BJP. And if someone says the opposite, well, of course, he's anti-BJP. All other assertions on the basis of macroeconomic data are open to question. So my request to you this evening is, let's put our politics aside and discuss an economic issue on its own terms. In what I'm going to say, I will first outline what I think is the nature of our employment market and argue that the problem is as much incomes as it is jobs. Second, I'll point to some bright spots in an otherwise grim picture to make the point that we can hope for change. Third, I will look at the solutions that have been suggested for improving the situation and explain why I think they fall short, and then offer some thoughts of my own, including on the need to pay out a monthly income support. Fourth, I will look at the employment challenges posed by artificial intelligence, and I will close with some thoughts on the increasing imbalance of power between employer and employee, and consider some directions for policy. I'll request your attention for about half an hour from here on. So let's start with the unemployment numbers. The government says it is 3% or less. That may or may not be correct in a technical sense, but in a broader sense, the number is plainly delusional, because only about 58% of our population in the working age group of a billion people actually works. In the past, it has been higher at around 65%, which is about the level in many countries. In China, it's even higher than 65. The missing 7% of those who've dropped out from 65 to 58%, those missing 7% have joined people who are not looking for work. They've simply dropped out of the labor market. We're talking of some 70 million people. Next, let's look at employment in agriculture. This involves close to half our workforce. While there are variations, farm incomes are invariably low because too many people produce too little. We don't need 250 million people to produce what our agriculture does. China produces 2.5 times as much with 175 million people. That's 30% less than us in agriculture. If our agriculture were properly organized, anything up to 100 million workers could leave our farms without agricultural output suffering. Income per head would then go up for those who remain in agriculture. So why are so many excess numbers engaged in farming? The answer is that they have nowhere else to go. In fact, after the COVID disruption, millions of additional workers have gone back to working on farms, which is truly bizarre. So now even more people depend on farming income. So it is only natural that 155 million have registered under the Rural Employment Guarantee Program. The other trend is that the number of women engaged in unpaid work has seen a sharp increase. Some of them might be available for paid work if it were available. Taking the surplus workers on farms, the additional numbers that have dropped out of the labor market, and the increase in the number of women doing unpaid work, anything up to 200 million could be either working or working more productively if the labor market offered them suitable opportunities. Household incomes would see a sharp increase, since it is mostly women in the working age group who either opted out or are doing unpaid work. In this context, the 3% unemployment figure makes little sense. Meanwhile, the fortunate ones at the top end of the market mostly work for a regular salary, plus there are employers. That's close to a quarter of the total numbers employed. Within that group, the organized sector, which means establishments of at least 20 workers, is only about 17% of the total. 1/6 of the total are in the organized sector. That comprises 76 million who are now members of the Employment Provident Fund scheme and another 10 million or thereabouts in various governments. These 86 million support families comprising up to 350 million people. That's a quarter of our population and a larger number than the entire population of any other country, with China being the obvious exception. This is the top-end segment, 350 million people out of 1,400, that drives much of our consumption and growth, and which makes India among the top 3 or 4 markets in the world for everything from cars and aviation to mobile phones and home appliances. The rest of the workforce comprises casual laborers, self-employed people, and those on contract. They are semi-skilled or skilled tradespeople on construction sites, in our mandis and retail markets, people plying traditional crafts or more contemporary ones in small establishments like power looms and diamond cutting centers. We also see them all around us as drivers of trucks and cars, security guards, roadside vendors, domestic help, and increasingly as delivery boys, gig workers who lead a precarious existence financially and often physically. There are 2 elements that we don't have enough of in this mosaic. One is women, as I mentioned, and the other is large-scale factory employment, which hasn't grown the way it has in many other countries. We'll come to why in a moment. Given this broad structure of our workforce, my first substantive point is that our bigger problem is the nature of employment rather than unemployment, and the fact that so much of it is of low value, providing low incomes. We have most people off the poverty line, but in their place, we have hundreds of millions who live uncertain lives on the edge with no margin of safety. Most of them work for less than the minimum wage, let alone the more generously defined living wage. And just to be clear, in Delhi, the minimum wage is about 17,500, and the living wage for an average family is about 25,000. Getting people up to that higher standard requires, first and most important, a better educated workforce. But though we have almost universalized school enrollment, we offer little real or quality education. I would wish that some of the money being poured into the physical infrastructure, badly needed as it is, but ego projects like bullet trains would be spent more usefully on improving our education system. I turn now to some of the silver linings in this otherwise somewhat grim picture, because the labor market seems to find its own solutions in a growing regional imbalance where there is actually a shortage of workers now in quite a few states. That shortage has been met by migrants from the heartland. States like Tamil Nadu and Kerala are into a population transition because their total fertility rate has fallen well below the replacement level of 2.1 births per woman. Tamil Nadu's TFR is as low as 1.4 and Kerala is 1.5. Even West Bengal is down to 1.4. Believe it or not, that is about the same as the 1.5 average in the European Union. These states will soon see their population shrinking, and this spells a huge opportunity for workers in the heartland states to migrate south and west. Indeed, half the workers in the industrial town of Tirupur in Tamil Nadu are now said to be Hindi-speaking. Most of us are not fully aware of the scale of this interstate migration. The 2011 census, that's 13 years ago, put the figure at 41 million. It would be a very much bigger number now. Migration usually raises income levels or people would not migrate. I happened to be in Chennai in January and got in touch with an old colleague from Business Standard. He said he had just rebuilt his family home in an old temple town an hour or 2 outside Chennai. He had used a labor contractor to get workers from Bihar to work on his house construction for a daily wage of 850 rupees. I was pleasantly surprised at the high wage level, and he told me that if he had hired local labor, it would have cost him 1,100 per day. So I asked around, and it turned out that migrant workers from the heartland states do get wages in Tamil Nadu that are multiples of what they would get back home. Similar, for some categories, that's similar even to the wages which until now you could see only in Kerala. For some categories, the daily wage rate crosses into 4 digits, as I mentioned, but for others, it may drop to 600. On a monthly basis, most migrants in these 2 states particularly seem to earn more than the minimum wage. Some even get what would qualify as a living wage. There is a similar picture broadly in states like Punjab, Gujarat and Maharashtra, even Rajasthan, as we saw during the COVID shutdown, when millions of migrants in these states had to find their way back home to their villages further east. Uttarakhand today has a higher consumption level than Maharashtra, according to the latest consumption numbers. If that's so, it's because of the migrants from Garhwal and Kumaon who work in and around Delhi. So we have an emerging picture down the geographical spine of the country, where there is actually a labor shortage. Surplus labor from further east gets absorbed in these states. Migration has its costs. Migrant workers usually live in poor conditions. They've almost always left their families behind in the village, where their wives look after old parents and mind the farm perhaps, and children grow up without a father. These are not ideal social conditions, but the situation in the heartland would be far more distressing without the migration phenomenon. I therefore count this as a silver lining. The most straightforward good news story is that the growth is about the growth of the organized sector. The numbers here are still modest, but if you look at the Provident Fund organization, its contributing membership has been growing rapidly from about 45 million a few years ago to a current figure of 75.6 million, as reported on the organization website. Now, EPFO numbers are sort of hard to put together in a coherent way because the numbers sometimes contradict themselves, but these are the best estimates. 7.6 million is on the website. 45 million is a number that was given in answer to a question in Parliament, so I take them as at least broadly reliable. And this rapid growth suggests that we could see further rapid growth in the coming years. And so that means that already close to 30% of our non-agricultural workforce is now in the organized sector. And if these trends continue, where the numbers being enrolled in Provident Fund seem to be in excess of 10 million a year, we could potentially have half the non-farm workforce in the organized sector with Provident Fund membership in the next 5 or 7 years. This would bring about a qualitative change in our labor market and potentially drive up wages in even the unorganized sector. Alternatively, it would pull more workers off the farms. Either way, it's a very positive development as I see it. There is a third sign of change. I had said that India has not managed the large-scale movement of workers from farm to factory, largely because of mistaken policies. But change has begun in some of the more prosperous states again, where the percentage of workers engaged in agriculture has fallen substantially from a national average of about 45 to 50%. Kerala and Punjab are close to the Chinese level of having only about a quarter of their workforce engaged in agriculture. That's half the national average. Haryana has less than 30%. Even in West Bengal, only a third of the workers are now on farms. The twist is that most of the people who moved out of farming have not gone to work in factories but into the unorganized labor market. This is less than ideal, but one must assume that they're earning more than they would have on the farm or they would not have moved out. To sum up what I have spelled out so far, the overall employment situation provides massive challenges. But there are at least 3 signs of positive change. People from the poorer states are migrating to places where they get work at better wages. Second, the organized sector of the job market is growing quite rapidly, and this too means higher wages. And third, the numbers dependent on agriculture have come down in some states. I call these silver linings because the overall national picture still tells us that wage levels are not rising very fast. But clearly, on the margin, there is change happening. There may still be some way off before we can see fundamental change in the structure of the national employment market. But I do think that future change may be more substantive and come faster, or at least we can hope so. I turn therefore to the third part of my lecture to ask the question, how could faster change be brought about? The standard economic argument is that we need more factories to absorb surplus labor from agriculture. This has been the traditional route taken by most economies, but I am skeptical about whether it will happen in India on the scale required. Successive governments have tried to address the factors that are set to stand in the way of rapid manufacturing growth. They have changed labor laws, improved our transport and other infrastructure, lowered corporate tax rates, offered incentives and subsidies to get new industries going. So far, though, the share of manufacturing in the economy and the share of labor engaged in manufacturing both have remained stubbornly static. It is possible that at some point the cumulative impact of the changes gets us over the threshold so that rapid industrialization finally begins to happen. This may well happen in the coming years with foreign investors looking for an alternative to China as a manufacturing base, and given the increasing attractions of the large and growing Indian market. The government on its part has made clear that access to the Indian market depends on a manufacturing base being set up in the country. So tariffs have been raised for many imports, incentives and subsidies are being offered to those investing in India, and at least some international companies seem more interested in India than before. So why am I skeptical? I think there are four hard truths about rapid job creation in the manufacturing sector. First, you don't create enough industrial jobs by catering to only the domestic market. However big the home market may seem, the world market is bigger. So you have to export if enterprises are to acquire global scale. But the great age of globalization is winding down as country after country gets defensive and protective of home markets. Export success now is more difficult than it was a decade or two ago. An industrial policy that is outward focused also requires a different approach from the government's present focus, which is primarily on import substitution. Second, industrial automation has reached a stage where you won't create the same number of jobs as before, even in manufacturing sectors that are considered labor intensive. Third, if you think cheap labor is your competitive advantage, countries like Bangladesh and perhaps even Vietnam offer still lower wages. Vietnam additionally offers higher productivity. And fourth, factory efficiency requires well-educated workers, and our school system still lacks quality. Finally, you need an efficient infrastructure so that transport, electricity, and other costs are low and competitive. Of the five, the only big change is that the Indian ecosystem has become more welcoming. Electricity shortages, once endemic, have disappeared. Work stoppages in terms of strikes and lockouts have become rare. Goods move much faster from factory to port by rail and on new highways. Our ports have substantially improved their efficiency. Customs procedures have got better. But the other constraints remain. So my guess is that there will be more industrial jobs in the foreseeable future, but the structural change that we want remains over the horizon. Meanwhile, Raghuram Rajan and Rohit Lamba, in their recent book titled Breaking the Mold, have argued that the future for India lies not so much in manufacturing as in services. And by services they mean not barbers or Uber drivers, but high-end services. The research-driven creation of intellectual property, giving birth thereby to the Indian equivalents of companies like Apple. They recognize that this can be done only with high-quality education, especially scientific and technical education. Frankly, I'm even more skeptical about this thesis than the more traditional one about manufacturing. I don't see us delivering what Dr. Rajan wants from our education system when we can't even fix our school system. It is true that our tech services companies have been trailblazers and created millions of high-end jobs, and that's because we have quality IITs plus some new quality private universities. But even they don't do cutting-edge research. To the extent that such research is taking place in India, it is in the local units of global companies. So it's hard to see how this can be the primary solution to our employment problem. If manufacturing and services are at best partial solutions, why not look for the end game in agriculture? This is not what people usually say, so I want to spell out in some detail what I have in mind. One of the reasons for low incomes in farming is that crop productivity per hectare in most crops is well below the best levels achieved in other countries. Whether it is rice, wheat, cotton, mangoes, fresh vegetables, potatoes, tomatoes, chickpeas, you name it, India's productivity compares poorly, indeed very poorly. The gap in most cases between our productivity and the best in the world is large enough to be positively embarrassing. For instance, experts from Israel who studied our mango cultivation some years ago said that if we change the spacing of mango trees and did some intercropping, the income from mango growers could multiply, could double or even treble. So there's plenty of scope for increasing agricultural incomes by boosting productivity. You don't have to get to global levels, but you can increase it substantially. We can also boost agricultural incomes by giving up on our tendency to clamp down on farm product prices every time food inflation inches up. Our desire to protect consumers from inflation usually comes at the cost of the farmer. We ban exports of crops, we hasten to import them, we unload government stocks at well below procurement prices. All of these depress agricultural product prices and affect farmer income. Third, it should be possible to encourage the cultivation of more labor-intensive crops. Wheat is among the least labor-intensive, whereas rice requires more labor on account of the need for transplanting. But new rice seeding techniques are taking away the need for transplanting. Other crops like cotton are also labor-intensive. One cannot expect any large-scale change in cropping patterns, but every partial solution contributes to the total solution. The most substantial way of increasing farm-related work is not on the farm itself, but off it, by fostering enterprises that use local crops to add value and create employment. I point to the Sahyadri Farmer Producer Company in Maharashtra, which sources the supply of tomatoes and creates local employment for sorting, grading, and packing tomatoes, which Sahyadri then exports to some 42 countries. It is also a contract manufacturer of ketchup. Tomato prices are volatile, so Sahyadri Farm offers farmers a year-round minimum price at the bottom end and a 1 rupee price premium over the market at the top end, which is the kind of assurance farmers need in order to minimize market risk without state intervention or subsidy. Another example is Araku coffee, which you may have heard about, grown organically by tribals in the Eastern Ghats near Visakhapatnam and exported as artisanal coffee. Researchers have calculated profits from growing coffee in the Araku Valley at 2.3 lakh rupees per hectare. An even more impressive example of a successful agro-enterprise is the Synthites Group, located an hour from Kochi in Kerala, which now accounts for 30% of the global market for oleoresins. The company processes Kerala's varied spices to create a range of products for use as food flavoring and in the perfume industry. Having visited Synthites, I can tell you it is an inspirational story. A homegrown but world-class enterprise located in rural Kerala, with operations and facilities now in several southern states and indeed overseas. Its success is such that Kerala now can't produce enough of the spices that Synthites needs for processing, so it imports raw spices from Vietnam. In Maharashtra, there's also the story of Maha Grapes, set up in 1991 with 16 grape grower cooperative societies as members. A Maha Grapes team went out to explore the world grape market and studied Chile's success in the business. The lead was then picked up by Mahindra Agro, which is now the leading exporter of grapes and okra procured locally. There are many such enterprises, but many of them are yet to acquire scale. The exceptions, which we all know about, are Amul and the sugar cooperatives and companies like Synthites. But even Sahyadri, Araku, and Mahindra Coffee are firmly established and can grow. These and others harness technology to develop products, set up marketing links, and establish brands. Being situated close to the farms where their raw materials are grown, They create employment locally so that surplus farm workers don't have to migrate to cities in search of work. Looking to agriculture and agro-based industries for one of the solutions to our employment and incomes problem is not to look backward as you may think. Fisheries are Norway's biggest export after oil and gas, and its salmon fishing business is organized into sales cooperatives. So are California's almond growers, who account for 80% of the world's almonds. Our state governments, I think, should be doing far more to encourage the birth and growth of farmer-producer companies, because building businesses and exports from our agricultural base is, to my mind, a surer way of creating large-scale employment in the places where workers are. It is, therefore, a more realistic solution for both the jobs and incomes problems than expecting 100 million agricultural workers to migrate to where our large factories are set up, usually in urban areas that are poorly administered. What do we do until these and other initiatives change the dynamics of our employment market? I would argue that we've probably reached a stage where there is some kind of income subvention, we've probably reached a stage where some kind of income subvention to about half of our 300 million families has become inescapable. You could say this is a dole when money could be spent more productively on investments that create jobs. But we really have no immediate solution to the double problem of low productivity work and low incomes. Whatever solutions we work out will take time, and we cannot expect people to wait indefinitely for things to change. Financial payouts are already given to widows, old people, the differently abled, and farmers. But these are selective, and the sums are inadequate. The time may have come for subsuming all such payments into a basic income support program. If, for argument's sake, 3,000 rupees are provided every month as a subvention to support 150 million families over and above what they already make, the net additional cost would be perhaps about 1% of GDP. That money could be raised without difficulty through a hike in the GST rate, and if needed, by tweaking corporate and individual tax rates. I turn now to the challenges posed by artificial intelligence, or AI. It's really too early to say whether this will be a non-revolution like 3D printing or something as momentous as the discovery of electricity and the internal combustion engine. At the moment, it looks more like the latter, partly because of the incredible speed at which AI is developing. In just 10 years, the amount of computation power used to train AI models has increased by 10 billion times. Processing that took weeks now gets done in seconds. And the horizons for AI are constantly expanding. Elon Musk has declared that AI would be, quote, the most destructive force in history, unquote. Till not long ago, and that means maybe a year or just some months, the belief was that automation would take over mostly routine work. But it is now clear that AI will reach out much further and step onto the turf of highly educated and well-paid workers in non-routine functions. They could even get creative. One of the demands of the script writers in Hollywood who went on strike last year was that producers would restrict the use of AI in generating film scripts. In a recent test, 453 people were given writing assignments, with half of them allowed to use ChatGPT. Those who had ChatGPT took 40% less time to conclude their assignment, and their output was judged to be 18% better in quality. The McKinsey Global Institute forecasts that 15% of the global workforce will be displaced in just 6 years. Technological change has affected workers before, even eliminated whole categories of work, but perhaps not at the speed or on the scale that is now being predicted. Governments and societies need to harness and direct the change. Darren Acemoglu and Simon Johnson argue in their new book, Power and Progress, that the changes which technology brings about depend on the policies we adopt to direct technological development, and then the policies that determine its use. In other words, they argue technology does not develop autonomously, it depends on how we want it to develop. We know that AI can boost productivity. The question is, will it also lead to better shared prosperity? AI could be a productivity booster in fields as diverse as agriculture and medicine, warfare, of course, and even software coding. But the question is, will it aid farmers and factory workers in their work or replace them? Will it create more jobs than the old ones that inevitably will get lost? For some preliminary answers and the potential dilemmas, let's look at the specifics of how AI might be used. Will we encourage self-driven cars when India has millions of car drivers who might be put out of work? This is an unusual market where most one-third of cars, according to Maruti, are driven by drivers, they're not self-driven. So self-driven cars have the potential of a huge displacement of workers. In the US, there is actually a shortage of truck drivers, so they might push for having self-driven trucks. But there is no shortage of truck drivers in India. So should we encourage self-driven trucks? And if we don't, will we be blocking technological progress? Meanwhile, call center work that has been offshored to India may get reshored back to the home countries if AI demolishes India's labor cost advantage. That could spell disaster for us. So how far should factory automation go? The Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, has called for a human-centric AI. What does that mean? For instance, governments have to ask whether they can tax wages more than they tax capital. Have we created a fiscal bias towards automation? Will we put as much money into retraining workers as we put into AI research? At the moment, we have more questions than answers, but these questions must be addressed and appropriate policies evolved. Finally, we may have to take a hard look at the results of such labor policy reform as we have introduced. When we pushed for a more flexible labor market as a way of attracting investors and boosting industrial investment, what was the compact with organized labor? The compact was that if they gave up on the extreme job security they enjoyed, more jobs would be created and more people would get jobs. Today the question is, has it happened? Or is it just that the conditions of employment have become more one-sided, with employment growth confined largely to the contract segment and to gig workers? The data is quite striking. By 2021-22, it's 2 years ago, according to data from the annual survey of industries, 2 out of every 5 industrial employees were on contract. That's 40% of the total. In 4 years till then, there was only 5% growth in the regular roles of companies, 5%. At the same time, in the same period, the number of people employed on contract surged by 23%. That's 4.5 times as much in contract. Was this the intended result of labor law reform? Niti Aayog now says that the number of gig workers will treble to some 24 million by 2030. That will account for another big chunk of new jobs created. And a survey report says this week that gig workers like cab drivers and delivery boys invariably work 10 to 14 hours a day and more. Yet, more than 70% of them find it hard to make ends meet. Do we think this is okay, or should we do something about the working conditions of gig workers? Some state governments have begun to address these issues. And to be fair, the new labor codes stipulate that contract labor must be paid the same wages and benefits as regular employees. The codes also have various provisions for unorganized sector workers, such as making safety net benefits available to them for a small fee. The key question is whether these provisions will remain on paper, as many have in the past. At the moment, the new codes have yet to come into effect, though 4 years have passed since legislative approval, so we can only pose the questions. What AI does is to give a new urgency to the questions that are already before us. For instance, what do we do with those workers who will inevitably get displaced because of the use of AI? One of the new labor codes provides for a certain amount of money to be paid to any worker if she or he gets retrenched. This is to be over and above the normal retrenchment payout, and the stipulation is that the extra money must be used for retraining. The question is, even if such money is provided, will retraining happen? Do we have retraining programs in place? To repeat, I do believe that we need a flexible labor market, but we also need to address the growing imbalance of power between employer and employee. AI, with its simultaneous promise and threat, should hasten thought and, where required, corrective action. In closing, I'd like to offer a brief insight into the tribulations of our educated unemployed, to give some sense of the harsh realities in the job market, particularly for those who have some kind of post-school education. And I will take an example from UP, where some 4.8 million people are apparently willing to become police constables. 4.8 million. And they are upset that the exam to fill 67,000 vacancies has been postponed. Millions of others, or maybe the same people, want to sit for exams in the state to become what are called review officers and assistant review officers, ROs and AROs. Now, an ARO with the officer tag is a nice new term for a clerical job, and it offers the prospect of becoming a full-fledged RO with pay that could eventually go up to 1.4 lakh per month. So who wouldn't want to be an ARO? But to become an ARO, you have to write an exam and answer some tricky questions. For instance, you're asked to give the sequence in which the following were discovered: the pi meson, the neutron, electron, and proton. That's one question. Then you are expected to know whether the UP budget is 84,833 crore, or more or less. And is Sreta Tavisin the first woman chairperson of the Railway Board, or the Prime Minister of Thailand, or the author of Tales from Banana Republic? Or, if a semi-permeable membrane is placed between the solvent and the solution, in which direction will the solvent molecules flow? Would any of us qualify to become an ARO? So we can laugh or we can shudder at the prospect of having to, as they say, ratify such random facts from physics, economics, international affairs, chemistry, and yet other fields. And the people who set those questions seem to think that you need to know all this in order to function as an ARO. The only way to prepare for such an exam is to get hold of a leaked exam paper and then ratify. Since the stakes are high, the incentive for leaking are also high. So in state after state, exam papers get leaked, and then the exams get postponed, which raises frustration levels for all those millions who would want to be police constables and AROs. But wait, the state government gives the consolation prize to these frustrated youngsters: free bus travel for the next trip to the exam center. Someone in Lucknow has a sense of humor. Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Mr. Ninan, for that brilliant, comprehensive, and at times funny and sad commentary on unemployment in India. I, for one, always get confused between the CMI data, the data from the periodic labor survey, World Bank data on unemployment, because nothing matches. But after hearing him, a lot of things have started making sense to me, and I hope they made sense to you too. I hope we'll be able to put this on our site, both the lecture and the YouTube recording of the lecture, so we can sort of see it, read it in greater detail. And I think it has a lot of pointers on understanding the nature of unemployment in India and what AI can or cannot do. Now, may I invite our treasurer, Nupur Basu, eminent documentary filmmaker, to give a token of our appreciation to the speaker, Mr. T.N. Ninan, This is not an unemployment dole, although you are unemployed, but do please accept it. This is all we can do.
Thank you, Nupur. Well, that brings us to the close of what has been a truly rewarding, riveting evening. I would now like to thank all those who made today's program possible. Mrs. Devaki Jain and her son, eminent journalist Srinivasan Jain, for sponsoring the Chameli Devi Jain Award. The Verghese family, especially the late B.G. Verghese's sons Vijay and Rahul, for supporting the Media Foundation. Mr. T.N. Ninan, for giving the B.G. Verghese Memorial Lecture. The jury members, Radhika Ramaseshan, Maria Malavi, and Richard Mahapatra for their time. Special thanks to jury chair Radhika Ramaseshan for her hard work. Thanks also to this year's winners, Grishma Kutar and Ritika Chopra, for accepting the award and for being present today. A very big thank you to Mr. Shyam Saran, President of IIC, and Mr. K. N. Srivastava, Director of IIC, for their continuous support. Many thanks to the Chief of Program Division of the IIC, Lal Somlyani Tochong, I hope I got that right, better known as Tete, for being there for us at all times. Thanks also to former TMF Secretary Manika Chopra for her guidance. Thanks to the current chair, Mr. Bharat Bhushan, and members of the Media Foundation for your active involvement and cooperation. And of course, all the brilliant, brilliant women journalists who applied for the award. Last but not the least, thank you all for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you and good night.